You're listening to the Happy Doc Student Podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing clarity to the often mysterious doctoral process. Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Let me and my guests show you how to put more joy in your journey and graduate with your sanity, health, and relationships intact. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Frederick, and today I welcome back to the show one of the coolest people I know, Dr. Paul Shaw. As a professional musician, he has authored 2 drum instruction books and written over 100 songs. His most recent recording, Moment of Clarity, was released on Summit Records in 2020. After serving 20 years as a touring musician in the United States Air Force, and thank you for your service, Paul, he made a decision to further his education and recently, just about a year ago, earned his Ph.D. in Interdisciplinary Studies with a concentration in Humanities and Culture, as well as a certification in creative writing. Brill Publishing recently released his book, The Women's Music Movement, Music as Feminist Praxis, 1973 to 1980. Paul, I'm so excited to have you back.
Thank you, Heather, for giving me a return visit. I feel honored.
Now, we were chatting before we started recording, and I let you know that I looked at my notes this morning and saw that we recorded our original episode in December 2020. It is currently the beginning of August 2023, so that was just over 2.5 years ago, if you can believe it. And during that episode, you were halfway through your doctoral program, and we talked about the decision-making process that you went through to make sure that you were in a program that was going to be a good fit. And we talked about, although the doctoral journey really is a journey of becoming an independent scholar, an independent thinker, the importance of having a social support network, having a peer network. So here you are. You graduated a little over a year ago, and I can't wait to pick your brain and have you reflect on that experience and share your wisdom with the audience. Where do you want to start?
Well, first of all, it is remarkable. It's kind of inconceivable to think how much time has gone by. But, I'm realizing we're talking about where in my program we started, and I'm realizing that was right around the time that the coursework phase of the doctoral process was coming to a close. I was probably 6 months from a full semester from closing that sort of first chapter and going into the next phase, which is the dissertation itself. We were talking about community and how it's an individual process, but community is essential, as you articulate so well in your book that I loved, by the way. It's essential to find a community to get you through. And I think that's especially important during the coursework phase, first 2.5 years. I noticed in my own journey that during the dissertation phase, everyone, particularly in my cohort, we were in very different places. By the time I finished coursework, some were there, some were still taking courses, but then it even became more varied based on our personal lives when it became time to write. And so suddenly the writing did become a very individual journey. I mean, I would say solitude more than isolation. But yeah, that second part of it did change a little bit.
And did you find that you were meeting with people, even though you were at different phases? Were you intentionally calling them together, or were you reading each other's drafts? How did you keep that connection going?
I would say probably what started out as a 90% of the cohort weekly getting together, it significantly dropped to the ones who were in the same place. I probably had 2 who I stayed in touch with, plus a writing group where we met once a week. None of us were in the same cohort. We were in different places in the program, but we were all in the union doctoral program. And we would just meet for an hour and share something that we were writing at union in that hour. There's usually about 5 of us. And we would upload it to a Google Drive ahead of time. And so we all had them and could look at them and then just kind of go over each other's work and give some positive feedback, some improvements, very much a workshop kind of environment.
Yeah, it sounds like you had 2 types of kind of social support going on. The first, as you were talking about your cohort kind of falling away in terms of really then connecting with people that were at your same place, it reminded me of the research out there that says you don't need to have a ton of friends. You just need to have a few really good friends, right? It's less about quantity and more about quality. Would you say that having at least one other person to kind of walk alongside you through this process was important?
I also think it was reciprocal. And I think there's some value in not only getting the support, but knowing you're there for someone else. There's things to be learned from both roles. And yes, it definitely helped. I keep coming in my mind, I keep coming back to this image, sort of a metaphor for this, and that is a rocket. When a rocket takes off, it's massive. All the parts are there. It's roaring. It's the beginning and it's exciting. And there's 20 of us, but by the time it's out there, it needs to do what it needs to do to break through and get into space. It's just that one little piece, everything falls off. And it kind of felt like that in some ways, but that was a very obviously important piece. So yeah, it reminded me of that. And we got to see each other at graduation as well. The one other person who graduated at the same time.
And it's always nice to finally have that face-to-face meeting, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to digress a little bit, but when you have that opportunity to walk and meet people and have that experience, I really like to encourage you to think seriously about it. If your reflex is, I'm done, I don't need to see those people. It's really a nice way to have ceremony around this accomplishment, I think is really important. So I think that's awesome that you went and you were able to meet some of your cohort.
Not only did I go, had Melanie, my wife, came, and actually my mom was in town, so she came along. So it really kind of made it kind of extra special. And it's very easy, as you just mentioned, to not go that route after, especially if it's been a slog, several years in the works. On the other side of it, I highly recommend to anyone completing their doctoral work to go and walk, be hooded, be recognized by your faculty and friends, and bring a loved one if you can, and just really kind of experience the gravity of the moment.
Yeah, I didn't make that choice. While I had graduated, was doing my graduate work back east, took a postdoc out in San Diego. And so when they had the traditional graduation, I thought, I'm already set up in this new life, this new line of work. I have the degree. I got what I came for. I said, I'm good. But every time I'm at a graduation, which, I attend a lot of them, I think, oh man, if I had to do it over again, I'm not going to say I regret it, but if I had to do it over again, I think I would go. And so if we loop back around to the conversation we were having, you not only continue to nurture relationships in a very synergistic way. I love that you brought that up. I once mentored a student who was a retired Navy SEAL, and he would draw a lot of analogies between being in a doctoral program and being a Navy SEAL, actually. And I remember once him sharing a story about, there's times where you're the one pulling the other person across the line, and then times you're being pulled across the line, right? So having someone who's got your back, who's reminding you why you're here, and you doing the same to them when need be, is really invaluable. That's not in the curriculum. It's this extra but super important part of the process. Could you finish without it? Sure. But I would argue You're going to finish with more ease and grace, with more joy in the journey if you've got a partner there walking the journey with you.
And with your, physical, spiritual, emotional health more intact than if you're just trying to hammer it out alone, without a way to voice the things that we all experience in that journey.
And then you took an extra step. I'm curious, maybe it wasn't an extra step. Was the writing group part of your program? Because I'm fascinated by this idea.
I was lucky. There was a student, A.C. Pinella, goes by Pinella. And Pinella started this writing group. I think he was a cohort before me. And I don't know when in his time at Union he began it, but I was fortunate enough to just kind of be able to join it. He finished a semester before me. But the writing group persisted. So I think I did that writing group for about 3 semesters, maybe a year to a year and a half. So he started that for his cohort, and it became a word of mouth thing. Ultimately, I think there wasn't any more than 6 any given evening session, and we just kind of supported each other. We're able to give different kinds of critiques because we weren't all in the same program. So it was a very dynamic group. All of us, the thing we had in common was we were trying to improve our writing.
Which is often the thorn in the side of a dissertation, doctoral project writing student, the writing. And this sounds like such a fascinating idea. If you're at a university that doesn't have a writing group, this might be something that you want to consider, because you went through your program very quickly, 3 years start to finish. I mean, that's fast. Paul, that's fast. I have to think one of the reasons you did that was because your writing was up to par and where it needed to be, because that's where so many students get stuck and spend time in these revision cycle loops.
For some reason, from the very beginning, I understood, I conceived of writing as the heart of the entire process. For some reason, I had that understanding from the very beginning. So I was looking to improve my writing from the very beginning. And I think, of course, I had a little bit of experience having written 2 drum instructional books. It's a very different kind of writing, but it was still the kind of writing that required heavy editing. Other drummers needed to be able to read it and understand it so that they could actually practice the musical materials. So I had an understanding of what it meant to communicate through, because ultimately that's what the written work should do. Being a student of music, it was very easy for me to adopt those sensibilities and become a student of writing. Throughout every course, the common thread is writing, so that I kind of adopted that early.
Well, the common thread, Paul, is writing, but I don't think a lot of people see that thread or want to acknowledge that thread, or perhaps would prefer to ignore that thread.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Sort of kind of wish the writing part away for the other stuff.
Yes. And listeners, you can't wish the writing part away. It will be there. I love this perspective of starting a doctoral program with one of your goals being, I'm here to improve my writing, so that by the time you get to that big capstone project at the end, you're feeling more confident, you're understanding the nature of revisions.
Yes.
Right? There are a lot.
A lot. It's a revision is just constantly occurring in a daily thing until you are done, until the day you defend. And so trying to find a way to make a positive process. Revision is your friend. Make friends with that process.
This making friends with writing through the revision process really is a symptom of upping how you think, of pushing the limits of how you think, right? You said writing to communicate. You've got these ideas. You want other people to understand them. And maybe when you were in your bachelor's program or your master's program, you could do that in 1 draft, 2 drafts. But here we are asking you to think at a doctoral level. We're asking you to climb your way up Bloom's taxonomy, right, into that elusive creation construct.
Yes.
We want you to create a new way of looking at the world. I always struggle as a faculty member when students will say to me, well, just tell me what you want me to say, or just tell me how to fix this. And I would say, it's not that easy. You need to revise this so that you're demonstrating that you've read this body of literature, that you can synthesize it and analyze it and then create something new, not just parrot it back. And that's so difficult to explain to people. It's like, you know it when you see it.
Yes. The bulk of my student learners at this point are undergraduates. One of the courses I teach culminates, and we work on it for 8 weeks, in a 6 to 7 patient research paper. Now, this is undergraduate students, but it's the foundation. And I continually come back to this. Please understand, this isn't a book report that you're going to write. You're not going to report on what you read. You are going to go into the reading process with some sort of curiosity, and you are going to present what the readings tell you about your curiosity, or your claim, your argument, your question that you want to start. And it may change. You may have to discuss the fact that you were wrong, or some parts you were right, some parts you were wrong, but it's more than just regurgitating it. It's about presenting your thoughts in a well-written way that reflect knowledge of which you.
And I hypothesize, and this is so difficult, is we spend so much of our lives in an educational system where we are rewarded for knowing what someone else said and being able to repeat that. We're not as much rewarded for going out on a limb, taking risks with our ideas, maybe even arguing some well-established points. We're kind of told, color in the lines.
Yes.
Like a paint by numbers. No,
Right.
The stem should be green. The petals,
Yes.
in this class, we want the petals to be yellow. And you say, okay. And when you do what you're told to do, you get a good grade, and so you're reinforced. Do it that way. Do it the way the teacher wants you to do it. And now suddenly we're changing the script on you.
Yes. We want, we want purple stems, and we want you to explain and support and defend your purple stems.
And we want to acknowledge that you're coming into this process with your life experience, with your paradigms, your ways of viewing the world and looking at the world, and how do you think things really work? And we're often not asked to think that way.
Right. You mentioned something earlier I thought is relevant here as well. We were talking about writing, and when you enter a doctoral program, all these writing expectations come out. And we talked about how things get reinforced in this other way of learning, coloring in the lines. But another thing that exacerbates that is those of us coming back later in life to do this, and there's no real experience with this idea of theater writing. And so it's a bit of an abstraction, and then closing the gap as quickly as possible so that it's no longer an abstraction while you're writing 10-page papers all of a sudden.
Yes. So if you are coming back to school after being gone for a while and you're wondering, wow, I'm getting a lot of feedback about my writing. I'm wondering if this is normal. We're here to tell you it is.
Yes.
Right, Paul? It's part of
Absolutely.
the process.
Yes. Red ink everywhere.
Lots of red ink, but
Lots of margin comments.
it's reasonable to think that that's to be expected. It's also reasonable to think that the responsibility is on you as a doctoral student to take action like you did, to reduce the amount of red ink and reduce the number of comments, right?
Right.
So having successfully completed a program in a record amount of time, Paul, if you could go back and talk to yourself, you pick either before you started your program, during, in the middle, towards the end, what wisdom would you give the pre-Dr. Paul Shaw?
That's a really good one. So while I think I did a pretty decent job of this, I still think it's the best thing I'd give myself. I would absolutely give it to everyone, but I would also give it to myself. And that is to trust the feedback. Trust the feedback. And this is part of making friends with revisions. Settle in with the feedback rather than get sort of worked out. If it's a lot, if the grade is low, rather than want to run back to the faculty, argue the feedback, which I see a lot. Saw from my own cohort a lot. I highly recommend, toward improvement of your writing, to sit down, just make a pot of coffee or whatever you like to drink, and carefully read all the feedback. I think another thing we don't teach, that students don't get as a formal instruction, is how to address feedback. I think it is an abstraction for students. It's not, you read it, you get the gist, and you try to put that gist in the paper. You actually have to go line by line and make those exact changes in your work. And I think that's an important one that I would tell myself and anybody to sit with that feedback, because those are the golden nuggets of the education.
This is a big challenge for a lot of students. Really, I would say probably for everyone. When you get feedback about something that you've put your heart and soul into, it can sting a little. It can feel a little ego shattering. I'll put links to an episode below with Dr. Kelly Olson where she talked about how to perceive feedback as a gift, which I thought was a really nice episode. But I love that recommendation. And I'm wondering, is there anything besides the way you approached feedback at the beginning, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Let's see. I imagine there are several things. I think I would have tried to think about the whole arc of the program, to think about what's coming sooner than I did. Because in that first course, second course, even the third, and I mean semesters, 3 courses per, faculty are very quick to share what's coming down the pipe, but to say, you don't have to think about that now. Just right now, focus on what's in front of you, which is good advice. Absolutely. In retrospect, though, I think I would have been able to handle in some way of connecting even those earliest classes, the why of those earliest classes, to how it kind of fits an expectation when you have to sit down and write 150 to 250 pages. Those realities, I think, would be helpful for students to know about those realities soon. Because when the time came that it was time to think about it, it went from suddenly I was in a class or a semester where I didn't have to a semester where I absolutely had. So a little bit of a bridge. And I don't know if I'm saying that faculty should have done something different, but I think I would have considered those things be less siloed from course to course and try to see the big picture from the very beginning.
I think that's interesting perspective from a student, but also as a faculty. I do that a lot. So faculty who are listening, maybe sometimes we want to relieve this feeling of overwhelm by saying, well, you don't need to worry about that now. But maybe instead of saying that, we say, we don't want you to get totally freaked out about this right now, but this is coming.
Yes.
And maybe just a sentence or two of, and why it's so important that you meet this learning outcome in this class is because 6 months from now,
yes,
we're going to ask you to do this. And so please, for goodness sakes, pay attention.
yes, yes. One of the first courses I had was a critical thinking and writing course. I happen to geek out on this course. I have my wonderful, Diane Hacker, Nancy Summers, a writer's reference. It has all three writing styles. And I geek out on this. And I love that I get to teach in all three. But that is not the case for most people. And to understand in that course, or to come back around and have a conversation, even for just 5 to 10 minutes throughout the semester with the class about, hey, this course, we're trying to get your writing up because you need to produce this original piece of knowledge, this original way of looking at things, and write in a way that lets readers know very clearly when you're writing your words, when you're bringing in your sources, paraphrasing it, you're quoting, doing it correctly, proper formatting, all those things. It's good to just kind of touch back in a short conversation with students, I think, throughout the duration of a course and a program, and just keep it all related to each other.
Kind of connect the dots, because this is the first time, right? I mean, unless you're really unique, when you're going through a doctoral program, it's the first time you've done it.
Yes.
And you're being taught and mentored by people who have already done it and probably mentored quite a few students before you. And so sometimes I think we forget how important it is to connect those dots. So I think that's a great insight to share. So what are a few things, Paul, that you did throughout your program that you're so glad that you did, that you highly recommend? You've shared a lot already, but other things maybe that we haven't talked about that you're like, wow, I want to make sure that the listeners hear this.
Yes. I am a fan of organization, which kind of on the surface sounds like that goes against what a creative normally would like. But I love to keep my learning organized so that it's accessible whenever I need it. Now, I did two things, but one of them is, I think, most important. And that is your digital storage of choice. Mine is Dropbox. I would organize semester 1 would be a folder. Within that folder, each class name. And then within that class, each week, just everything in its proper place for 3 years. And when it came time to begin doing my literature review, the same. I had a folder for initial search sources. Then I had a folder for some that were more targeted on certain keywords. And then I finally had a folder of sources that were getting into the work. And then every chapter along the way, I divided the dissertation into the chapters and just kept everything organized, but also in pieces that were accessible. When I published my dissertation, flipped it into a narrative, more of a book, that information became invaluable. I didn't have to go frantically searching. And quickly, the other thing that I did to mirror the digital process was all along the way, I had dossiers with all of my articles that I highlighted, made margin notes. But by the end, it was about 15 dossiers, which I did not keep. I kept my digitals.
I kept my hard copies. I think I moved mine a couple times and finally let them go. I mean, when I was doing my work, I didn't have the option. Dropbox didn't exist.
Yes, of course.
But
yes.
I get it. Like, there are all these cool things you can do with highlighting and taking notes electronically. But I just have to say, and maybe things will change as generations, age out, but I see a difference between students who actually write in the margins and flip the page and can hold the article, and ones who are just downloading them and reading them and hoping they remember to go back, or where did I see that? There's something about the physical thing. And I don't know, I'll be curious to hear some of the listeners who are younger say, no, I don't think that's true, or some faculty, but when I have students who say, look, Dr. Frederick, I've got 7 folders. I've organized all my research. I'm like, aha, that's why you're such a pleasure to mentor, because you're almost living and breathing the research when you can hold it. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
And I don't know to what extent young folks are actually picking up pens and putting it to paper. But I feel like the more faculties you engage, the more senses that are getting engaged in the process, listening to a lecture, but maybe you record it. And by the way, I also have voice memo recordings of every lecture, every rehearsal from my graduate programs through the doctoral program, because I go back and listen. So going back and listening, making some notes, all of these ways of engaging your faculties deepen the learning. Maybe there's a version of writing for young folks, and I don't know what that is or what it would be, but you just have to be ready when a creative idea comes your way. It's very difficult. Those ideas will come and go if you're reading a computer, if you're not somehow able to write it down or voice memo it for later.
Yeah, I know there's some research about, the hand-brain connection, but maybe there's a dissertation out there waiting to be done to explore this empirical question. But I'll say this, hey, if you're struggling and all that you've been doing is reading online a blue screen and you haven't taken the time to maybe print some of those seminal articles out, sit down at a table with your favorite hot beverage and get your highlighters out and put that pen to paper. Maybe this is something to explore, and then let us know how it goes.
Exactly.
Paul, as we wrap up today's episode, do you have maybe a favorite quote or some words of wisdom that you want to share with the audience, or that helped you get through your program, or maybe that you're living by today?
A jazz musician who I admired and studied with once said to me, keep your default setting on discovery. Think about discovery as the way you approach or process anything that hits you from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. And with that, just on a more macro level, definitely stay open. Let the bitterness of feedback kind of move through you, breathe through it all, and just stay open and try when you find yourself getting fixed in a certain mode or seeing a thing that you feel like it should go a certain way. Remember to just stay wide open as you complete task after task in the program. Just keep your mind and heart open to new ways of doing things. It's good. It's good for the health.
It's always so much fun to spend time with you. Thanks for sharing your experience with the listeners. It was a joy to chat with you today.
Really good to talk, Heather, and I appreciate you bringing me back.
Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Until then, if you're looking for more ways to invite joy in your journey, check out the free resources at expandyourhappy.com. You'll find downloads like an article I wrote titled The Doctoral Journey, 12 Things You Need to Know That They Probably Won't Tell You. You'll also find a PDF that organizes all podcasts by the 7 steps detailed in the Happy Doc Student Handbook, which you can also find on the website. Finally, if you're looking for a Happy Doc student swag, I've got that too. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and YouTube channel, and if you want to make my day, rate and review so that together we can change the way doctoral education is delivered and experienced. Hey, one more thing. Just a quick reminder that the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only.